Pick that up, sweetheart. That is what Dr. Marcus Whitfield said 47 minutes before everything changed. St. Michael's Hospital in Savannah hums with the usual fluorescent buzz, that constant electrical whisper that lives in the walls of every emergency room in America. Elena Martinez arrives at 0630 hours, moving through the parking lot with the kind of purposeful stride that comes from muscle memory, the same way she once moved through the rubble of Marja 20 years ago. Her scrubs are pressed. Her badge is clipped to her collar at exactly the right angle. Nothing about her appearance suggests anything other than what she appears to be, a civilian nurse with 3 quiet years of service at St. Michael's and a reputation for unshakable composure. The combat boots in her locker tell a different story. She passes through the ER entrance where the automatic doors hiss open like a sigh. The smell hits her first, that particular blend of antiseptic, dried blood on the tile floors, and the ghost of coffee from yesterday's shift that no one bothered to clean. Her left leg carries a slight limp, barely visible to someone not trained to notice such things. Most staff members never register it. The ones who do assume old injury, nothing more. They have no idea that every step she takes is a choice. That the pain in her hip is data. That pain is information, and information kept her alive for 23 years. Elena moves to the nurse's station and logs into the system. 3 years at St. Michael's. 1,095 shifts. Never a complaint filed against her. Never a single medication error. 3 commendations for patient care during trauma codes. The ER nurses respect her the way apex predators respect other apex predators, with a kind of quiet recognition that says, I see you, and I know what you are capable of. The doctors, most of them, treat her with the standard condescension reserved for nurses by physicians who have forgotten that medicine is a team sport. Except for Dr. Marcus Whitfield. For 3 years he has watched Elena move through his hospital with a precision that frightens him. She does not defer to him the way other nurses do. She does not laugh at his jokes. When she disagrees with a protocol, she says so, not rudely, but with the kind of certainty that suggests she knows something he does not. That certainty is what keeps him awake at night. Authority, Whitfield believes, is a thing that must be defended. It is a fortress with walls that must be constantly reinforced. Elena's quiet refusal to acknowledge those walls has become a splinter in his mind. This morning, she is going to extract that splinter. Morning rounds begin at 0730 hours. Whitfield enters the ICU with his entourage, residents, interns, surgical nurses, students, the whole machinery of surgical superiority. He moves like a man who believes the air part for him, and it does. People step back. Chairs scrape backward. He is 53 years old, carried 60 pounds of stress and privilege in the way his tailored coat hangs from his shoulders, and his wedding ring is a gold band from Cartier that cost more than Elena's first car. They reach bed 7. The patient is a 51-year-old construction worker named Morris, post-op day 3 from an emergency splenectomy. His abdomen is tense. His white blood cell count is trending upward. The nurses have noted increased drainage from the Jackson Pratt drain, clear, then pink-tinged, then definitely concerning. Elena is the one who documented this. Elena is the one who flagged it. Whitfield reviews the chart. His face does not change. But Elena is watching him, and she sees the moment his jaw tightens. She sees the moment he decides that the protocol he wrote, the antibiotic coverage he approved, must be correct, because admitting it is wrong would be admitting that someone beneath him noticed something he did not. The current antibiotic regimen is appropriate, Whitfield says. His voice carries the weight of institutional authority. He says it the way other men might say the earth is flat, with enough certainty that people stop asking questions. Elena does not stop asking questions. Doctor, she says, and her voice is perfectly respectful, perfectly deferential. A junior officer addressing a senior. The culture from the drain tip suggests gram-negative rods. The cefazolin coverage alone may not be sufficient. We might need to add piperacillin-tazobactam or broaden to a fluoroquinolone. The room goes completely silent. It is the kind of silence that has weight. It is the kind of silence that makes the fluorescent light seem louder, that makes the ventilator in the adjacent bed sound like it is screaming. 7 people are standing in this ICU right now. 7 people hear a nurse, a civilian nurse with no letters after her name, questioning the clinical judgment of the chief of surgery. Whitfield turns slowly. His eyes find Elena like a rifle scope finding a target. And then, loud enough for everyone to hear, loud enough that the residents and students all turn their faces away because they know what is coming, he says, "I'm going to make you a wager, Ms. Martinez. I'm going to bet you that you quit this hospital within 1 week. You've gotten a little too comfortable thinking you know better than the people who actually went to medical school. Let's see how long you last once you remember what the real hierarchy looks like." Elena's jaw tightens. Barely perceptible. The kind of micro-expression that flickers across someone's face for exactly 0.8 seconds before they lock it down again. But she does not argue. She does not defend herself. She simply nods once, looks back at the chart, and says, "Yes, doctor." That afternoon at 1247 hours, Elena is sitting alone in the cafeteria at a table by the window. She has brought her lunch from home: grilled chicken, brown rice, carrots. The kind of meal that someone disciplined eats. Someone preparing their body like an instrument. The cafeteria is loud with the casual chatter of hospital staff, the clink of silverware, the sound of a hospital that does not know it is about to change. Whitfield sees her sitting there. He sees her sitting there with her meal, alone, her hand steady as she cuts her chicken into precise pieces. He sees her and something in him snaps. Something about her refusal to break, her refusal to acknowledge his authority, has scratched at him all morning. The wager was supposed to work. The public humiliation was supposed to work. She was supposed to feel the weight of his position, the certainty of his victory. She was supposed to realize she had made a mistake. Instead, she had simply nodded and returned to her work. He approaches her table. He is walking with the kind of deliberation that suggests he has decided something, committed to something. The cafeteria does not know what is about to happen. The cafeteria is not paying attention yet. But Elena sees him coming. Elena always sees what is coming. Whitfield stops at her table. He reaches down and, with a swift motion that is not violent but is absolutely deliberate, he knocks her tray to the floor. The plate shatters. The rice scatters across the tile like confetti. Her coffee cup rolls under a table. The papers from her messenger bag, medical journals, notes, charts, scatter across the floor in a cascade of white. The cafeteria goes silent. "Pick that up, sweetheart," Whitfield says. He is smirking. He is actually smirking. His voice carries the satisfaction of a man who believes he has finally won. His voice carries the satisfaction of someone who has just reasserted dominance. Elena looks at the mess on the floor. She looks at Whitfield's face. And then she moves. She does not stand up quickly. She does not stand up with anger. She kneels down with the kind of methodical precision that suggests this is simply the next logical step in a series of steps. Her movements are efficient. Her hands are steady as they begin to gather the papers, stacking them carefully, checking for damage. A piece of rice clings to one of the journal pages. She brushes it away without emotion. The room is completely silent now. 34 people in the cafeteria have stopped what they're doing. 34 people are watching a nurse kneel in front of the chief of surgery while he watches her with the expression of someone who believes they have just proven something important. Her jaw tightens slightly. That is all. That is the only indication that anything inside her has registered this moment. Her expression is blank as stone. Her hands do not shake. Her breathing does not change. She continues to gather papers, continues to gather the remnants of her lunch, continues to move with the kind of absolute control that comes from having stared down worse things than this in darker places than this. Whitfield stands there for exactly 7 seconds. Then he turns and walks away, satisfied. But he has no idea what he has just done. He has no idea that he has just made a terrible mistake. He has no idea that somewhere in the hierarchy of things that matter, somewhere above hospital politics and surgical egos and tenure committees and board elections, there is a man named Commander James Reeves who has been waiting for Elena Martinez for 20 years. That Reeves is about to arrive at St. Michael's ER with a gunshot wound to the chest at exactly 0300 hours tomorrow morning. That the moment Reeves walks through those doors, everything that Whitfield believes about power and authority and hierarchy is going to collapse like a house built on sand. But that is tomorrow. Today, Elena Martinez kneels on the tile floor of the cafeteria at St. Michael's Hospital in Savannah and gathers her papers with hands that have held together more broken things than Whitfield could ever comprehend. The tile was cold under her knees. Elena gathered the scattered papers with methodical precision, each sheet aligned at a 90-degree angle before she placed it in the pile. Around her, the cafeteria had gone quiet, the kind of quiet where you could hear the industrial refrigerators humming in the kitchen, the overhead lights buzzing like angry wasps trapped in plastic. Someone whispered something. Another person laughed, then caught themselves. Elena didn't look up. Her jaw was tight, but her hands remained steady as the hands that had once field-dressed a 7-year-old child in a collapsed building 20 years ago remained steady now. She stood, the stack of papers organized and perfect. Dr. Whitfield was already gone, satisfied with the performance. Elena walked to the trash bin, deposited the ruined sandwich and scattered napkins, and clocked back in for the afternoon shift without a word to anyone. By 1400 hours, she was back in the ER. But Thursday morning came with a different kind of knife. During rounds at 0800, Dr. Whitfield stopped at the bedside of Mr. Patterson, a 74-year-old diabetic with a stage 2 pressure ulcer that Elena had been treating with enzymatic debridement and a hydrogel dressing. She'd been documenting daily, wound size trending down, no signs of cellulitis, patient pain stable at a 2 out of 10. The protocol was sound. Evidence-based. Textbook execution. Whitfield stood at the foot of the bed with his entourage of residents, medical students, and the other attending physicians trailing behind him like remoras on a shark. He glanced at the dressing, then at Elena, and smiled. That smile was the dangerous kind, the kind that made the fluorescent light seem too bright. "Nurse Martinez," he said, his voice carrying across the unit like a blade being sharpened against stone. "Why don't you explain your unconventional approach to wound care? Or is thinking above your pay grade?" The residents exchanged glances. One of them, a third-year named Garrison, actually smirked. Elena stepped forward and presented the facts in a voice that was perfectly calm, perfectly professional. She cited 3 peer-reviewed studies from the Journal of Wound Care, citing specific infection reduction rates and healing timelines. Her hands held the chart steady. Her voice didn't waver. Whitfield cut her off before she finished the first citation. "I didn't ask for a Google search, sweetheart. I asked if you could think." He turned to the residents. "This is why hierarchy exists. This is why we don't let nursing staff make medical decisions. They follow protocols. They don't write them." He looked back at Elena. "Change the dressing to a basic saline soap gauze. Twice daily. Document the change." He walked away without waiting for a response. Elena didn't argue. She didn't protest. She changed the dressing. But that night, she researched Dr. Whitfield's own published protocol from 2015. Basic saline soap gauze had shown a 12% higher infection rate in subsequent studies. She documented this in her private notes, knowing it would never matter. Friday morning arrived with reassignment notices posted at the nurse's station. Elena's name was circled in red pen, geriatric wing, bedpan rotation, 0700 to 1900. No ICU. No ER. No complex cases. Just bedpans and bed baths in the geriatric ward, the place where senior nurses went when they were being punished. Whitfield announced it loudly enough that half the floor heard him. "Martinez needs to learn humility before she learns medicine," he said, eye-scanning the room to ensure maximum audience. "We all have to master the basics, don't we?" Elena picked up her assignment sheet. She clocked out of the ER and clocked into geriatrics without complaint. She spent the day changing incontinence briefs, washing skin folds where sweat and moisture created breeding grounds for infection, listening to Mrs. Chen tell the same story about her grandchildren 3 times in 4 hours. Her hands were gentle. Her expression was blank as stone. By Saturday, something had shifted in the hospital's collective consciousness. The residents were watching her differently, some with pity, some with schadenfreude, the way people watch a public execution. Word had traveled that Dr. Whitfield had begun his campaign in earnest, and everyone understood the unspoken hierarchy of Savannah medicine. You didn't defend someone Whitfield had marked for destruction. Saturday evening, around 19:30 hours, Elena was restocking supplies in the pharmaceutical closet when Whitfield appeared in the doorway. His hands were in his pockets, his expression a study in casual cruelty, the kind of relaxed confidence that only comes from knowing you have institutional power backing your every move. He moved into the small space with her, close enough that she could smell his cologne and the coffee he'd drunk an hour ago. "You know what your problem is," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "You think those steady hands make you special. But you're just another nurse who doesn't know her place." He paused, letting the words settle. Then he turned and walked out, leaving a stack of charts on the floor by the door. "There you go, Florence Nightingale. Clean up." Elena stood in the stillness of the supply closet for exactly 4 seconds. The fluorescent tubes overhead hummed their mechanical song. She could hear her own breathing, slow, controlled, the breathing she'd learned in Marja when the mortars were falling. She bent and collected the charts. She filed them properly in the designated slots. She didn't miss a single page. Her colleague Sarah found her 10 minutes later, sitting in the break room with a cup of lukewarm tea that she wasn't drinking. Sarah was a cardiac RN, professional, respected, the kind of nurse who'd always kept Elena at a certain distance, the way people instinctively distance themselves from someone marked for sacrifice. "How do you stay so calm?" Sarah asked, sitting beside her. "I'd have told him exactly where to put those charts." Elena didn't answer. She sipped the tea that tasted like cardboard and water. Sarah waited for words that never came, then excused herself, understanding that some people don't want sympathy, they want to be left alone with whatever it is they're carrying. That night, Elena drove home through rain that hammered the windshield like applause, her hands gripping the steering wheel at 10 and 2. Her daughter Emma was doing homework at the kitchen table when Elena walked in, her backpack still on her shoulder. Emma looked up, and in that moment Elena saw her own face reflected back, the same dark eyes, the same determined jawline, the same armor that kept feelings locked behind bone and careful breathing. "Hey, Mom. You're home late." Elena forced a smile, the kind of smile that wasn't entirely false but wasn't entirely true either. "Just a long shift, baby. I'm going to take a bath." Alone in the bathroom, Elena locked the door and gripped the sink. The white porcelain was cold under her palms. She stared at her reflection in the mirror, and for the first time in 3 days, her jaw clenched so tight her teeth ached. She could see the muscle working in her jaw, the only external sign of the pressure building behind her eyes. She thought about the boots in her locker at the hospital, the desert tan color faded to the shade of old bone, the laces still knotted the way she'd tied them the last time she'd worn them in Helmand Province, the sole worn down on the right heel where she'd kicked a door open during a raid in Marja. 22 years. That was how long it had been since she'd worn them in anything but training scenarios. 22 years since Master Chief Petty Officer Elena Martinez had officially ceased to exist, her service record sealed, her security clearance deactivated, her name removed from every official database by order of Joint Special Operations Command. She was supposed to fade. Disappear. Become nothing but a name in a classified file that would be destroyed when she died. And now some man in a $200 tie was trying to erase her all over again. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was that it was working. Not on her, never on her. But on everyone around her. The other nurses were beginning to look away when she passed. The residents were starting to treat her like a cautionary tale. Even Sarah, decent Sarah, was beginning to distance herself. The hospital was choosing sides, and they were choosing Whitfield's. Sunday came, and Elena worked the evening shift in geriatrics, feeling the weight of the institution pressing down like a physical thing. She changed bedpans. She titrated oxygen. She held the hand of a 91-year-old woman named Mrs. Patterson who was actively dying and had no family to sit with her. Elena sat beside the bed for 30 minutes after her shift ended, just being present in the darkness, her hand resting on the old woman's arm. It was the only real work she'd done all week. At 2,200 hours, as she was clocking out, her phone buzzed. A text from Sarah: "There's been a gunshot wound in the ER. GSW to the chest. Marines are calling for trauma response." Elena read the message twice. 3 times. She looked at her watch, 2,215 hours. She had technically clocked out. She had no assignment in the ER. She could go home. She walked toward the ER instead. The paramedics burst through the automatic doors at 2,247 hours, their shouts cutting through the ambient hum of the ER like knife blades through tissue paper. Stretcher wheels squeaked against polished tile. The patient was male, late 20s, with a chest wound that bled dark and deliberate through the white compress. Elena moved toward the trauma bay before the triage nurse even finished the handoff, her eyes cataloging vitals, trajectory, the kind of entry wound that meant internal damage no one could see yet. "Gunshot wound, left anterior chest," the lead paramedic called out. "Entered at 45 degrees, missed the sternum, but we're getting breath sounds on the right only. BP was 110/70 in the field, now 98/60 and dropping." The patient's Marine Corps ID was still clipped to his collar. Elena saw it. She saw the name. James Reeves, Commander, 3rd Battalion, 5th Marines. And then she saw the tattoo on his shoulder, a small insignia, partially visible where his uniform had been cut away. Her hands moved on their own, steadying the stretcher, checking the for access the paramedics had established. The tattoo was a unit marker. Not just any unit. His unit. The one she'd served with 20 years ago. The one she'd pulled a 7-year-old boy from beneath a collapsed schoolhouse in Marja while rounds came down like hail. The boy who'd grown into this Marine. Elena's jaw tightened. Nothing else moved. She didn't blink. Didn't breathe differently. Her composure held like a dam holding back an ocean. "Trauma Bay 1, she said, her voice flat as concrete. "Get him on the monitor. 2 large bore 4s, type O negative ready, and I need lab stat. CBC, CMP, lactate, PT-INR. The surgical team was being paged overhead. Chen from trauma surgery. Patel from general. Dr. Whitfield, chief of surgery, was being called in from home. Elena knew because she'd heard his voice on the phone in the background, irritated at the interruption, asking if the patient could wait until morning or if this was really a use of resources situation. The operator had put him through anyway. Reeves was conscious when they got him onto the hospital bed. His eyes found Elena's face. Recognition flickered there, not immediate, but present, like a match being struck in a dark room. She maintained eye contact for exactly 1 second longer than protocol allowed, then turned to the monitor. His vital signs were already telling a story she didn't like. BP dropping steadily. Heart rate climbing. 98. 102. 105. His breathing was shallow, labored, the kind of breathing that came from a body in distress, trying to compensate for something internal that was failing. The entry wound was concerning, but it was what she couldn't see that mattered. Internal bleeding. Pneumothorax. Or worse, cardiac tamponade, where blood pooled in the pericardial sac around the heart, literally drowning the organ with each compression. The ER doors opened. Dr. Chen arrived first, still tucking his shirt in. Patel came from the surgical lounge, where he'd been reviewing cases. Morrison from cardiothoracic. Kowalski from trauma. DeLuca and Green from on-call rotation. 7 doctors. The entire surgical roster for a Sunday night, converging on Trauma Bay 1. And then Dr. Whitfield, his presence arriving like a cold front, moving past the cluster of residents to the bedside. His eye swept across Reeves once, just once, and Elena saw the calculation happen in real time. The math of liability, of insurance exposure, of a young military officer with an injury that screamed complication. "What do we have?" Whitfield asked, not looking at Elena directly, speaking instead to Chen as if the primary nurse didn't exist. "Gunshot wound, left anterior chest, penetrating," Chen said. "Vitals are trending south. BP 98/58 now, HR 108, respiratory distress, unilateral breath sounds on the right. Chest X-ray is pending. Odds of major vessel injury." Whitfield leaned closer to the monitor. 30% at minimum, Patel said. "Could be subclavian, could be the IVC, could be the heart itself." Whitfield straightened. His face carried that expression Elena had learned to recognize over the past 3 days, the expression of a man calculating whether a patient was worth the institutional risk. Whether saving him was worth a liability waiver, the insurance premiums, the board meeting questions that might follow if something went wrong. "He's stable enough for imaging," Whitfield said. "Get him to CT, full chest protocol. We'll reassess once we know what we're dealing with." "Doctor," Elena said, her voice quiet but present. "His vitals are deteriorating." Whitfield's eyes landed on her like a predator noticing movement in grass. "I'm aware of the vital signs, Ms. Martinez. The patient is being managed appropriately." The word was silent. The subtext was loud. A nurse. Just a nurse. Someone with a clipboard and credentials and education enough to follow orders, not make them. She looked back at the monitor. Reeves' breathing had become more labored. His color was paling. The machine was building a narrative in real time, a story of a body in crisis, running out of time, drowning from the inside. They moved him to CT. Elena followed, because protocol said the primary nurse stayed through imaging. She watched the technician position him, watched the machine spin its rings of X-rays and cameras, watched the computer process and reconstruct images of a chest cavity that shouldn't be visible from the outside. What she saw in those images made her lungs tighten. There was blood. Not just in the wound track. Everywhere. Pooling in the pleural space. Sitting around his heart like a sentence being written. The CT images went to Dr. Whitfield's tablet within 2 minutes. Elena watched his face from across the control room. Saw the moment he understood. Saw the moment he chose anyway. Back to Trauma Bay 1. Back to the monitor. It was 0307 hours now, just after 3 in the morning, the dead hours when hospitals feel like empty churches and every beep of a monitor sounds like prayer. Reeves' blood pressure was 86/42. "His pressure's collapsing," Elena called out. "I'm seeing elevated JVD, muffled heart sounds." The monitor alarm screamed. High-pitched, rhythmic, a sound designed to cut through every other thought in the human brain. Reeves' monitor showed the unmistakable pattern of cardiac tamponade, the electrical signal bouncing off a heart being crushed by fluid, the rhythm becoming smaller with each beat, the pressure dropping with each compression of an organ that couldn't expand. "Cardiothoracic now," Elena said, her voice carrying the weight of command even though she had no authority to command anyone. "He's in tamponade. We need the surgeon in here." Dr. Whitfield came back into the bay. He moved slowly, deliberately, reading the monitor with the expression of a man who'd already decided. Chen was reaching for the phone. Patel was already scrubbed and gloved. Morrison and Kowalski were positioning the ultrasound machine. "Stop," Whitfield said. His voice was soft. That was the terrible thing about it, not a shout, not aggression. Just a man exercising the power he'd spent 15 years accumulating. Everyone stepped back. "Doctor, the patient is in acute tamponade," Morrison said. "He needs drainage and imaging guidance. We have the equipment ready." "I'm aware of what he needs, Dr. Morrison," Whitfield said. "He also needs to be informed of the risks of emergency intervention. Pericardiocentesis has a complication rate of 6% even in optimal conditions. His prognosis is poor regardless of intervention. The hospital has liability exposure here that I cannot justify." His heart is being crushed, Elena said. Whitfield turned to face her directly. His eyes were the color of ice water. Thank you for your input, Ms. Martinez. This is above your pay grade. The phone was in his hand. Dr. Chen, I'm directing you to step back from this case. Dr. Patel, you'll discontinue your preparation. Dr. Morrison, Dr. Kowalski, Dr. DeLuca, Dr. Green, I'm making a clinical decision to defer surgical intervention pending further radiological review. We will observe the patient. We will provide supportive care. We will not perform an emergency procedure that has high risk of mortality and will expose this hospital to considerable litigation. He'll die without it, Elena said. Not our problem, Whitfield replied. Not anymore. One by one, they moved away from the bedside. Chen first, his face tight with anger but trained by 18 years of hierarchy to obey. Patel next, removing his gloves with deliberate precision. Morrison, Kowalski, DeLuca, Green, 7 doctors, walking away from a man whose heart was failing in real time, whose blood pressure was now 78/36, whose monitor was showing the electrical pattern of a system in collapse. 7. The number sat in the room like a 7th person, a witness to what was happening. 7 physicians trained to save lives, stepping back because a man with institutional power had decided this particular life wasn't worth the risk. Reeves' lips were turning blue. Elena turned to the ultrasound machine. Her hands reached for the spinal needle kit without permission, without authorization, without the legal framework that a hospital had carefully constructed to keep people like her in their designated box. The supervisor who'd been called by Whitfield was standing in the corner, ready to stop her. The nursing director had been contacted. Protocol was being mobilized like a military response. Elena, the supervisor said, discomfort clear in her voice. You don't have authority for this. No, Elena said, and her voice had changed. The deferential tone of the past 3 days was gone. This voice carried weight. Carried command. Carried the kind of calm that comes from having already survived the worst the world can offer. But I have responsibility. And I have hands that work. She pulled up Reeves' ultrasound, found the pocket of black fluid around his heart at the pericardial sac, positioned the needle with the kind of precision that came from 10,000 hours of practice in environments where mistakes meant death. The needle went in below his xiphoid process at a 45-degree angle, guided by ultrasound, angled toward the right shoulder. Dark blood filled the syringe. Arterial blood, old blood, the kind that shouldn't be anywhere but inside veins. 100 milliliters. 150. The syringe filled like a nightmare made visible, like pulling the evidence of catastrophe out of a human chest. His monitor changed. The electrical pattern reformed. His pressure climbed. 85. 90. 95. His lips began returning to pink. Get him a second for, Elena said, and it wasn't a request. It was a command. Type ONEG, hanging now, and get me someone to assist with a proper surgical drain. This fluid will reaccumulate. Whitfield was already on his phone. His voice was low, controlled, the tone of a man making decisions in the dark. This is Dr. Whitfield. I need the hospital attorney, the chief medical officer, and 3 board members on an emergency call within the hour. We have a nurse who just committed gross negligence and possibly assault. She performed an unauthorized invasive procedure without physician supervision. I want formal charges initiated immediately. I'm also requesting her termination for gross violation of scope of practice. We are looking at significant liability exposure. He was still talking when Reeves' eyes opened and focused on Elena's face. Martinez. His voice was paper-thin, barely audible over the monitors. I'm here, Elena said. Her hands remained steady. The trembling, if it had ever come, would not come in front of the patient. The rage would be processed later, in private, in the darkness of her car in the parking lot. Right now, there was only the work. Only the focus. Only the absolute certainty that she would not let this Marine die while 7 doctors watched from the hallway. His eyes held something between recognition and understanding. Between present moment and 20 years past. Between the boy in Marja and the commander in the hospital bed. "You came back," he whispered. "I never left," Elena said. His hand found hers for just a moment before the monitor beeped its steady rhythm and she stepped back, clinical distance reasserting itself like a well-worn uniform. The ER bay fell silent except for the ventilator's mechanical whisper, a sound like wind through a canyon, steady and unchanging. Reeves' oxygen saturation climbed. 91. 94. 97. Normal. The pressure that had been crushing his chest cavity, that 150 milliliters of blood that had turned his lungs into a drowning chamber, was gone. His systolic pressure had climbed from 67 to 104. Alive. Still alive. Elena documented everything with the precision of a sniper logging wind speed and distance. Every timestamp. Every vital sign before the needle went in, during, after. The exact volume drawn. The technique used. The patient's response. The clock on the monitor read 0315 hours. She wrote in the electronic chart, emergency pericardiocentesis performed at bedside, 18-gauge spinal needle under ultrasound guidance, 150 cubic centimeters sanguineous fluid aspirated from pericardial sac, patient response immediate and sustained, transferred to ICU for continued monitoring. No editorializing. No emotion. Just facts that would either protect her or convict her. Dr. Chen appeared at the curtain's edge around 0330, his jaw tight as he surveyed Reeves' stabilized condition. The EKG rhythm strip showed sinus tachycardia but normal morphology. The chest X-ray showed clear lungs. Chen's eyes moved to Elena, then away. "I'll supervise his ICU admission," he said quietly, as if the words tasted like ash. It wasn't gratitude. It wasn't acknowledgement. It was a man doing the minimum to keep his own license intact. By 04:15, Reeves was transferred upstairs, and Elena returned to the nurse's station to complete her charting while the night crew moved in layers around her like she was already a ghost. But that wasn't the worst part. Her shift was supposed to end at 0700. At 0530, two security guards appeared at the nurse's station. They didn't speak first. They just stood there, filling the space with the particular gravity of authority, their presence like a sudden pressure drop before a storm. Elena looked up from her computer screen. She already knew. "Ms. Martinez," the older guard said. His name was Delante, a man she'd known for 3 years, a man she'd helped stabilize after a hernia repair. His voice carried the careful neutrality of someone delivering a sentence he didn't believe in. "You're being placed on administrative leave, effective immediately. Pending investigation for gross negligence in patient care. You'll need to surrender your badge and accompany us to clear your locker." She stood without resistance. The words washed over her the way rain washes over windproof fabric, present but not penetrating. Her hands were steady as she logged out of the hospital's computer system. Steady as she walked to the locker room. Steady as she turned her employee badge face down on the shelf and reached for the worn combat boots hidden in the bottom of her locker, laced together at the heel, exactly where she'd kept them for 12 years. The leather was cracked at the ankles. The soles had walked 847 kilometers of Afghan dust. The insoles still held the shape of her younger feet. She placed the boots in a canvas bag along with her personal items, a photo of Emma at age 6, a faded unit patch, a small first aid kit she'd assembled herself. Nothing that would incriminate her. Nothing that would raise questions. She changed out of her scrubs in the bathroom, back into the civilian clothes she'd worn that morning, jeans, a grey t-shirt, a jacket that concealed nothing because there was nothing left to hide. The other nurses watched her pass the central station. Some looked away. Some stared. One mouthed, "I'm sorry." Elena didn't acknowledge any of it. The walk through the hospital felt like moving through water. Each corridor stretched longer than it should have. The service entrance doors hissed open onto the parking lot, and dawn was breaking across savannah in shades of pink and purple that felt like an insult to the moment, too beautiful, too indifferent. Elena drove home in silence. Radio off. No music. Just the sound of her tires on wet pavement and her own breathing. Emma was waiting at the kitchen table when Elena walked through the door at 08 for 7 hours. Her daughter sat with her school backpack beside her, lunchbox still packed, confusion clouding her face like a filter she couldn't see through. "Mom? Why are you home? Did you trade shifts?" The question was innocent and devastating. Elena sat down across from her. Her hands remained steady. Her voice remained level. "There was a situation at the hospital, baby. A patient needed help, and I helped." She paused. 12 years of military training screamed at her to compartmentalize, to lock this down, to protect her daughter from the truth by shielding her behind a wall of silence. But Emma was watching her face with the intensity of a child who'd learned long ago to read between words. "There will be some people who don't understand why I did what I did. And there will be consequences." "What kind of consequences?" Emma's voice had dropped to a whisper. Elena opened her mouth. Closed it. And for the first time in front of her daughter, her facade cracked. Not dramatically. Not with trembling or tears that came fast. But slow, careful tears that tracked down her cheeks like she was observing them happen to someone else. Her vision blurred. She kept her hands flat on the table. "I might have lost my job today, sweetheart. I don't know yet. I'm not sure what comes next." Emma was 12. Not old enough to understand classified operations or federal witness protection protocols or the impossibility of explaining why her mother carried ghosts in her uniform long after she'd stopped wearing it. Emma was only old enough to understand that her mother was breaking, and she had no tools to fix it. The girl reached across the table and took Elena's hand, not her mother's hand, but a stranger's hand, cool and steady and now trembling with the first real crack in 12 years of composure. Emma held it without speaking, and for 7 full minutes, neither of them moved. By 1100 hours, Elena had received her formal termination letter from hospital administration. By 11:45, Dr. Whitfield was already executing the calculated destruction of everything else. His office on the 3rd floor smelled like mahogany and ambition. Whitfield sat behind his desk with a phone pressed to his ear, already on call number 3. The first had been to Jonathan Blackwell, a board member he'd golfed with for 15 years. The second had been to his college roommate at the State Nursing Board office in Atlanta. Now he was speaking to the hospital's malpractice insurance carrier, his voice smoothly constructed to sound concerned rather than vindictive. Yes, I understand the gravity. But we have documentation of insubordination and unsafe practice patterns stretching back 2 months. Yes, I have written records. He was lying with the precision of a surgeon making an incision. She questioned my medical judgment in a public forum. Directly challenged my authority. And yesterday, she performed an invasive procedure without authorization, without physician oversight, without even, he paused, letting the implications hang in the air like smoke. Without written documentation that I approved it. The insurance carrier was already doing the math. 1 lawsuit from a patient who didn't survive, multiplied by the existence of a nurse who'd practiced outside her scope, equaled the difference between a manageable claim and a catastrophic one. By the time Whitfield hung up, the insurance company was already positioned to defend itself by throwing Elena under the vehicle she'd used to save a man's life. He opened his personnel files, not the real ones, but the master copies he kept on an external drive, encrypted and hidden. He began typing. Incident report, dated March 15, 2 months earlier. Elena Martinez observed during medication round displaying inattention to detail and disrespect toward attending physician. The signature he forged belonged to Supervisor Linda Walters, a woman who'd actually been on vacation that day and had no idea her name was being used as a weapon. Another report, this one dated April 2, Elena Martinez questioned established protocol during rounds in a manner that constituted direct insubordination. He embedded these into the hospital's system with administrator-level access codes he'd never been asked to relinquish. The falsifications were elegant. Professional. Designed to survive scrutiny because they mimic the exact format and language of legitimate reports. By 1300 hours, he'd called the credentialing committee. By 1400, he'd called a colleague at the hospital where Elena had applied for a charge nurse position 6 months ago, poisoning that well with a soft-spoken conversation about reliability concerns and questionable clinical judgment before Elena's file had even been reviewed. By 1500, he was drafting the final email to hospital administration, recommend immediate permanent termination. Clear pattern of unsafe practice. Liability exposure unacceptable. At 16:30, Elena was still at her kitchen table, the termination letter in front of her, the words swimming in and out of focus. The letter was dated 0530 hours, backdated to make it look like they'd known about the problem before she'd saved a Marine's life. For gross negligence in patient care in violation of hospital protocol and state nursing standards. For unauthorized performance of an invasive medical procedure. For failure to maintain proper physician-nurse hierarchy. For reckless endangerment of hospital resources and institutional reputation. Her phone had been ringing all morning. The union representative. HR. Her attorney. All of them saying the same thing: you saved a man's life. You did the right thing. We'll fight this. None of it mattered. The institutional machinery had already ground into motion, and she was being fed into it one gear at a time. Emma came home from school at 1515 hours. The house was quiet in a way that made the sound of her backpack hitting the floor feel obscenely loud. She found her mother at the table, staring out the window at a savannah that was moving on without her. Mom. Emma's voice was small. Are you okay? Elena couldn't answer. She'd been trained to survive bullet wounds and IED blasts and the dehydration of desert warfare. She'd been trained to hold a tourniquet above an arterial bleed for 18 minutes while waiting for medevac. She'd been trained to watch 17 men be carried to safety and never feel the weight of it. But she'd never been trained to sit at her kitchen table and explain to her daughter that she'd been fired for saving someone's life, that the institution she'd bled for would bury her without hesitation, that sometimes doing the right thing meant losing everything. The tears came before she could stop them. Not the controlled release of a professional crisis, but the breaking of someone who'd held too much for too long. Emma watched, terrified and helpless, as her mother's shoulders shook and the woman who'd never shown fear suddenly became entirely, devastatingly human. That night, in his office with the door closed, Dr. Whitfield poured himself 2 fingers of 18-year-old scotch and smiled. The Martinez situation was contained. He'd made sure of it. She wouldn't work in Savannah again. She wouldn't work in Georgia again. By tomorrow, she wouldn't work anywhere that valued references and institutional credibility. He was already composing the email in his head: the problem has been neutralized. She won't surface anywhere near patient care again. He had no idea what was already moving toward him, 847 kilometers away, from a place he couldn't see. The rotor wash shook St. Michael's Hospital like thunder rolling across the tarmac. A UH-60M Black Hawk descended through the Savannah heat, its landing gear touching down on the helipad at precisely 1,147 hours. The sound of it, that deep mechanical throb, carried through the entire administrative wing like an announcement that something had shifted in the world. 2 Marines in dress blue stepped onto the concrete, their movements precise and synchronized, their uniforms creased sharp enough to draw blood. They walked directly to the administrator's office without stopping at reception, without asking permission, without hesitation. The kind of men who don't negotiate their way into rooms. They simply enter them. The security guard at the administrative desk, a Navy veteran named Patterson with 23 years of surface warfare on his service record, watched them approach. His face drained of color. Not fear exactly. Recognition. His hand moved to his radio, then stopped. These men weren't a threat. They were something worse. They were authority. He stood and said the words that would echo through St. Michael's for the next 72 hours, "That's a Master Chief Petty Officer call sign. Combat medic." His voice carried through the suddenly silent administrative wing like a defibrillator charge. Heads turned. Phone calls died mid-sentence. The CMO, Dr. Lisa Okonkwo, stepped out of her office. The hospital administrator, Robert Hayes, appeared in the hallway, his jaw already tightening as he tried to read their faces and failed. A two-star general followed behind the Marines, moving with the unhurried confidence of someone who had never been told no and likely never would be. He carried a manila folder, its edges worn soft from handling. The folder that contained everything. He stepped into the administrator's conference room and laid it open on the mahogany table, the gesture deliberate and final. When he began to read, his voice was granite grinding against concrete. Master Chief Petty Officer Elena Martinez. 23 years of active service. For Bronze Stars. He paused. Let that number settle in the room like a weight. The CMO's face had gone pale. 2 purple hearts. The administrator gripped the table edge. Navy Cross for Extraordinary Heroism Under Fire, Marja Province, September 2003. Extraction of 17 wounded Marines through sustained enemy contact over 3.2 miles of hostile terrain. The general looked up from the paper. Classified commendation, signed by the Secretary of Defense. That signature means she doesn't officially exist. Didn't officially exist. And then Commander James Reeves walked into the conference room in a hospital gown, the bandage on his chest white and stark against his skin, his wound still healing, his life still measured in careful breaths. He was thin from blood loss, but he stood with his shoulders back, the way a Marine learns to stand when nothing else makes sense. His voice was steady, the voice of a man who had survived things that would break most people and had decided not to mention it. She carried me 3 miles through enemy fire when I was a kid. 7 years old. Building collapsed in Marja. Everyone else cleared the structure. She went back. She carried me 3 miles to the extraction point while the entire Taliban fire base was lighting up the city. He looked directly at the hospital administrator. She's the reason I'm a Marine. She's the reason I'm alive. And your chief of surgery left her to save my life alone because he was afraid of liability. The room stayed silent for 10 full seconds. No one breathed. No one moved. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead like insects trapped in plastic. Then Dr. Okonkwo's voice, "Where is Dr. Whitfield right now?" And the answer came from the FBI agents who arrived exactly 43 seconds later, their badges gleaming under the conference room lights, a federal warrant in hand. They had traced Whitfield's clumsy attempts to alter Elena's federal employment records, records that were tied to a classified Department of Defense identity protection program. His calls to the board members had been monitored. His emails threatening to destroy her job prospects had been intercepted the moment they left his hospital account. His forged personnel files, his backdated disciplinary memos, his fabricated negligence reports, all of it documented, all of it evidence. The federal system had been protecting Elena long before she knew she needed protecting. Whitfield had walked into a trap he didn't know existed. They found him in his office, packing a leather briefcase with shaking hands. When the FBI agents placed him under arrest, he was still trying to explain that he was just protecting the hospital, that he didn't know she was special, that she was just a nurse who had overstepped her authority. The agent reading him his rights didn't even look at him. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can be used against you in a court of law. Whitfield's face had gone the color of old bone. The walk from his office to the exit was the same distance Elena had walked yesterday in disgrace, but everyone watched him differently. Security walked on either side of him, their hands near their belts. His colleagues stood in doorways and turned away. The CMO didn't meet his eyes. The nursing staff didn't move aside, they just watched him pass like he was already a ghost. He went past the nurse's station where he had corrected Elena publicly 17 times. Past the cafeteria where he had knocked her tray to the ground and watched her kneel to pick it up, the chart scattering across tile like the debris of a life being dismantled. The same corridor. The same walls. The same fluorescent lights that had witnessed everything. Now they were witnessing his exit. Photographers were already gathering at the hospital entrance, their cameras ready, their phones recording. The news cycle had already picked up the thread, federal arrest. Cover-up. Retaliation against a medical professional. By evening, the headline was national. By the next morning, 3 other nurses had filed formal complaints against Whitfield, their courage suddenly finding oxygen now that the fear had collapsed. The hospital settled all 3 within a week. His medical license was suspended pending investigation within 72 hours. The state medical board launched a full ethics review. His wife filed for separation, her attorney sending correspondence that was remarkably swift and final. The surgical wing he claimed to have built was officially renamed the Martinez Memorial Surgical Suite before the week was over, the irony crystalline and sharp. His name was scrubbed from the hospital directory. His professional biography was deleted. His published papers were flagged for misconduct review. The entire architecture of his authority simply dissolved, piece by piece, until what remained was just a man in a cheap suit sitting at a folding table outside a strip mall in Savannah 5 years later, selling supplemental insurance policies that no one wanted. His hands shook. His voice had lost its authority. He had aged a decade in 72 hours. But at Bethesda Naval Hospital in Maryland, on a stage lit by military brass and formal ceremony, Master Chief Petty Officer Elena Martinez stood in full dress uniform, the Distinguished Service Medal being pinned to her chest by the Secretary of the Navy. The citation was read aloud, no longer redacted, no longer classified, no longer buried in the files of agencies that didn't exist on paper. Her daughter Emma, 17 years old now and built with her mother's same quiet strength, sat in the front row holding a pair of worn combat boots. Those boots! The ones Elena had kept in her locker at St. Michael's, the only artifact of a life she wasn't supposed to be living. Emma held them like they were reliquaries, because they were. They were proof that her mother had been someone all along, that the nurse who made her breakfast and helped with homework was also the woman who had carried Marines through fire and saved lives in places the news never mentioned. Commander Reeves stood at attention in the audience, saluting. A salute of respect. A salute of recognition. A salute that meant she had been seen, finally, after all these years of being invisible. The hospital administrator from St. Michael's sent a formal letter of apology and an invitation to return. Elena never responded. She had moved past that place. She now trained combat medics at Camp Lejeune, teaching the next generation that rank meant nothing without courage, that policy meant nothing without principle, that the ones who have seen the worst often give the most. In her office hung a photograph, 7 empty doorways in an ER, a single nurse standing at a bedside, a Marine's life hanging in the balance. The caption beneath it read, "The ones who have seen the worst often give the most." And in a cardboard box under her desk, she kept the dented cafeteria tray that Whitfield had knocked from her hands. Some people kneel to pick up the pieces. And some people are built to stand back up. If you've made it this far, you already know the ending. But the question isn't whether Elena survived. The question is what we do when we're standing in a room full of people who are walking away. Do we walk away with them? Or do we stay? Subscribe to see more stories of quiet heroes who change the world when no one's watching.